What's up, NerfNet? Jeffrey here with Next Gen Nerf. First of all, I want to thank everyone who subscribed to my YouTube channel after my relaunch a couple weeks ago. Following me here is awesome. But not all of my content is video, so to get the full Next Gen Nerf experience, click on the link in the description to head on over to Patreon and follow me there too. For example, I just posted a poll related to the content of this video, and I'd love to get feedback from each and every one of you. With that said, let's get on to the business of the day. Batteries. Most stock blasters use alkaline batteries, your AA's, your C's, your D's. But as anyone in the community can tell you, alkaline batteries kind of suck. What you should be using are lithium-ion polymer, or LiPo batteries. Lithium-ion batteries in general are not only rechargeable, they have higher charge density, which means you get more juice for the same size and weight as other battery chemistries. That said, not all lithium-ion batteries are the same. Chemically speaking, LiPo batteries use a polymer electrolyte gel and a lithium cobalt oxide cathode, which for our purposes just means that you get extremely high charge density, even by lithium-ion standards, with some structural drawbacks. You see, when lithium-ion batteries fail, they fail explosively. That's why most lithium-ion batteries are built to be physically resilient to structural damage. LiPo cells, however, sacrifice some of that structural integrity to cut down on weight even further. This is why LiPo batteries tend to puff up when they start to fail. The polymer gel overheats, it evaporates, pressure builds up, pushing the walls of the battery outward. You can see why this might end badly. If you have a puffed LiPo, do not use it under any circumstances. Find out how to properly dispose of it and do so immediately. Now you might be wondering why we use LiPos at all in Nerf if they're so dangerous. But the truth is they're not actually that dangerous. Lithium batteries have been around a relatively long time, and there really is no risk involved in using them as long as you keep them within their recommended specifications at all times. Even more importantly, these specifications are the same for basically all LiPo batteries. The problem is the Nerf community's favorite method of meeting these specifications, a voltage alarm and generous overspecking. In other words, hopes and prayers. I'm going to show you a better solution and how I've implemented it on the FHK-76. Let's go to the notebook. The key to using LiPos safely is quite simple. Just remember to pay attention to TLC, temperature, voltage, and current. Yes, I could have said TVC, but that just doesn't have enough joke potential. At this point, you're either an electrical engineer and you're laughing, or you're not and you're totally confused. So let's just move on. Temperature is easy. If the battery gets below freezing, so 32 degrees Fahrenheit, or heats up above 125 degrees or so, it will start to fail. In general, you don't have to worry about the lower limit, but the upper limit could be an issue, especially if you're pulling a lot of current from the batteries. Voltage is also pretty simple. The nominal voltage of most lithium-ion cells is somewhere between 3 and 4 volts, and it's derived from the specific chemistry of the battery. In truth, however, the voltage of a lithium-ion cell varies depending on the state of charge. For LiPo batteries, this voltage ranges from 4.2 volts at full charge down to 3 volts at maximum safe discharge. Batteries that have multiple cells in series simply multiply the voltage by the number of cells. So the FHK-76's 3S battery voltage can range from 9 volts to 12.6 volts. Current is the trickiest of the three, because it varies from battery to battery. Every LiPo has two numbers that you care about here. The capacity, usually measured in milliamp hours, and what's called the C rating. The C rating is designed to normalize discharge rates across batteries of different capacities. The maximum amount of current you can draw from a battery at once is simply the capacity multiplied by the C rating. As an example, the FHK-76 uses an 8,000 milliamp battery with a C rating of 30, which means I can draw up to 240 amps without damaging the battery. There are two other things to consider when it comes to properly handling LiPos: ESD and balancing. ESD, or electrostatic discharge, can be a serious problem if it arcs across the terminals of a battery, so LiPos should always be stored in ESD-safe bags. The fireproof bags hobby stores convince you to buy are usually ESD safe as well, but you generally do not need anything fireproof unless you're traveling and regulations require it. Balancing is the practice of running current between cells to keep the individual voltages the same, which is important to prolong the life of the battery. When a multi-cell battery charges, the individual cell voltages don't always increase at the same rate, so you may have one cell reach 4.2 volts while the other cells are only at 4 volts. If you keep charging until all 3 cells hit 4.2 volts, that first cell might end up at 4.4 volts, which is too high. Balancing takes the excess charge from the first cell and distributes it to the other cells, ensuring that you never have any cell voltage greater than 4.2 volts. If you've ever wondered what the smaller connector on a LiPo battery is for, it's for balancing. You should always balance LiPo cells when charging multi-cell packs. Okay, now that we've covered the basics, you're probably wondering how you're supposed to keep track of all those numbers. And if you're smart, you don't have to, because you have a battery management system, or BMS, to do it for you. There are all kinds of BMSs out there for different battery chemistries and cell counts, but in general they do one or more of 3 main tasks: protection, charging, and gauging. The FHK76's BMS does all 3, so let's take a look at the schematic to learn more. So here we have the schematic for the FHK76's BMS, and it's pretty neatly divided into the 3 functional parts I mentioned: protection, gauging, and charging. This 4th subcircuit up here is for USB-C power delivery, which I'll cover in a bit. Let's start with protection. This circuit is responsible for monitoring pretty much all of the parameters I mentioned earlier in this video. It keeps an eye on the voltage of every cell, the amount of current flowing into or out of the battery pack, and it's one of the 2 circuits that monitors the temperature of the pack using an external thermistor. If anything is outside of spec, whether it be a voltage reaching 3 volts, or the current exceeding 25 amps, for example, one or both of these transistors will shut off, breaking the circuit and cutting off power until the issue is resolved. The current limit is much lower than what the battery is capable of, but I chose it based on expected performance. If my estimates are wrong, I can always change that number by changing the value of the sense resistor here. You see, it's actually very difficult to measure current directly, so the most common approach is actually to put a weak but precise resistor in the path of the current. Thanks to Ohm's law, which says that voltage equals current times resistance, we can measure the change in voltage from one side of the resistor to the other, and derive the amount of current flowing through the resistor by dividing that voltage by the resistance. Change the resistance, and you change the current threshold even though the voltage threshold, which is what the microchip really cares about, doesn't change. This next circuit is for gauging. This is what tells me how much battery life I have left, plus how healthy the battery is, and transmits that data over to the main control board so I can display that information on the blaster's touchscreen. For extra visibility, it also displays the remaining battery life by lighting up some portion of a 10-segment LED bar graph, controlled through these 2 shift registers here. Since battery performance is affected by temperature, this chip also monitors the temperature using a second thermistor. This last circuit is for integrated charging of the battery. This allows me to permanently leave the battery in the blaster, eliminating the need to safely store the battery on its own. Essentially, this integrated circuit takes a power input and converts the voltage to whatever the battery is at, driving the current into the battery to recharge it. Rather than get into the nitty-gritty details of how that works though, I'd like to show you this 4th circuit, which handles USB-C power delivery. Regular USB can only deliver 5 volts, which is rarely enough to charge anything but the smallest of devices. USB PD allows for a maximum power delivery of 100 watts in whatever combination of volts and amps you want. The trick is that the source and sink must negotiate with each other to determine what voltage and current will be used for power delivery before anything more than 5 volts and a couple amps can be used. This is important for backwards compatibility, but it does add a little complexity to the design. Fortunately, this chip handles all of the negotiation for me, allowing me to charge my blaster using USB-C at 20 volts and 5 amps if connected to an appropriate supply. Best of all, the charger is a buck boost charger, which means even if all I can get is normal 5 volts, I can still charge the blaster despite the blaster having a higher nominal voltage of 11.1 volts. It's just going to take a lot longer. Alright, that's it for today. If you like this kind of in-depth look at my design process and the science behind the decisions that I make, please let me know in the comments and I'll definitely make more. As I mentioned earlier, I'm doing a poll on Patreon to see what kind of features would be good to include in a BMS that I could sell on Etsy. So please, click on the link in the description and let me know what you think. Thanks again for keeping up with Next Gen Nerf. Please consider following my Patreon and becoming a patron if you can. Have a wonderful holiday, whichever one you celebrate, if you celebrate any of them, and I will see you next year.